Hi, welcome to Tech Talks Podcast. My name is Jeff Trent, a solutions architect at In Time Tech. Today I had a conversation with Olivia Kido, a product manager at Microsoft on the Excel project. We talked about how AI is being used, how LLMs are used, and some of her experience with augmented reality and virtual reality. We talked about the future of technology and how you can build effective teams. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Let's jump in. Okay, what about you?
Yeah. I also grew up in the area, so some similarity there. Um, my path into tech has sort of been might look inevitable from looking backwards, but I don't think it always felt very inevitable. I really came into tech just from a perspective of being interested in creating things and creativity. When I was a kid, I played a lot of educational video games, and I was really into making that kind of thing as well, which I didn't see as purely a technical pursuit, to be honest. I was doing programming. You've got sort of visual storytelling and textual narrative elements and sound elements going on. So there were, elements of film too. And I also made films as I was growing up. So um, I was creating kind of all these different types of things. But going into college, I knew I was kind of interested in making games and technical things, so I decided to go into computer science, and the GIM program at Boise State, which is Games Interactive Media Mobile, where I ended up working with AR and VR and some of the more emerging technologies that I've worked with. And I through that, I basically I didn't really know what a product manager was, but I think I started doing product manager things and kind of finding that I was drawn towards thinking about the higher level of the what and the why are we building, um, working with clients and customers and trying to figure out what's something that's going to help them solve their problems and be delightful for people to use. And so that kind of um, working on those projects and realizing that I enjoyed those kinds of things sort of drew me into product management. And then right now I'm a product manager on Microsoft Excel, and I've been there for 4 years, working on AI almost the whole time. And that was a much smaller, much different pursuit 4 years ago. And of course, it's ballooned into the LLM revolution that we're in right now.
Awesome. Yeah, as I guess you talked about growing up, those hobbies. We'll
Mhm.
definitely get into LLMs, right? But maybe you can share more about how those, growing up educational games, getting computer science, programming because of that, and what do you still do? Do you still do that in your free time now? Maybe you can share more about how that's kind of shaped your professional, personal development.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think it's given me a very, honestly, multidisciplinary kind of view of what I create. Because, like I said, games are really sort of a conglomeration of a lot of different kinds of creation, and I, I love that. I think different sort of modes of creation and different disciplines have a lot to contribute to each other and to something as to something at these tech things that we create, which are so multifaceted and so complex. Um, and so I definitely I think take those things that those experiences creating things growing up, and they really inform how I think about creativity when I build tech products. Even from one of my hobbies growing up was and something that I still do is playing music.
Hmm.
And um, that you wouldn't think there are a lot of connections between that and computer science necessarily. But I've just I think through being a product manager and working on a lot of things, I've realized that the software engineering process is so much more than programming. And one of the things that I think has really influenced how I think about that process is actually performing music live. I think that taught me a lot about ambiguity, like how to handle ambiguity and change. Because when you're performing music in an ensemble, um, there's sort of an unwritten rule, like you can make mistakes and you will make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes.
Sure.
But one thing that you cannot do is let that mistake stop you. You have to keep going. You have to just like get past it, get back on track. The song never stops. And so because you're in that space where you're like continuously sort of creating something, and I'll do improv when I'm performing as well. So there's that element of like creating something on the fly. Um, there are lots of different considerations that you're thinking about at the same time in the moment. There's like practical things of the piano is a very flexible instrument. So depending on what kinds of instruments I'm playing with, like if I have a drum, I don't need to be as much of a rhythm instrument. I can be a little bit more melodic. If we don't have drums, I need to pound the rhythm a little bit more and make sure everybody stays on track. There's considerations of like my own skill, how comfortable am I? What can I trust myself realistically to come up with or to play on the fly based on my own skill level? And then there's of course creative considerations of like how do I make this a beautiful experience? What can I add to the song? Um, what if someone is like the guitar is jumping forward to take a solo, I can like sort of step back a little bit and let that happen and let those things kind of emerge. How do I infuse emotion and feeling and expression into the song? Um, and so it's sort of this constant state of like give and take and prioritizing different things, honestly, um, in this ongoing song. And as I got into software engineering, I realized that it's often the kinds of gives and takes and like priorities that we have to make and trade-offs that we have to make are similar. So because software is so inherently complex, we can never really plan it out
Yep.
ahead of time. I mean, we try, we do the best we can, but it's never, we're never going to be able to anticipate everything.
Right.
And I think AI and LLMs have only compounded that.
Yeah.
It's a much more non-deterministic process that we work on now. And I think that experience of like being in a song and having to make those little micro trade-offs has really influenced the way that I think about doing that for my software projects as well.
AI isn't just a buzzword. It's becoming essential for staying competitive. We hear it all the time. Everyone says they do AI, but at In Time Tech, we don't just say it, we show it. Our teams build real, innovative solutions that solve real business problems. Want to see how? Head to our show notes and watch our free demo to see what's possible. Yeah, that's a philosophy I've definitely taken. I mean, first of all, let me just say that I love the analogy. I'm not a musical person myself, but I feel like some of the best developers, best engineers I've worked with, or at least some of them, have had the musical background also. And uh, I know others have related that it helps, like I guess time in front of a keyboard or something. I don't know. Um, I I think but I think what you're saying, there's also similar philosophy that I have where there's lots of trade-offs. There's the best way of doing things.
Mhm.
And I think that's general in life, but definitely in software. And it's all about what trade-offs are you willing to, what are the pros and cons and what might be best practice in the industry isn't best practice in your project.
Totally.
And you might have developers on your team who say we need to do it this way because that's best practices. And it's like, well, it doesn't make sense because that's going to take 3 months to implement, and we need a product to sell, And uh, I think it's tricky. And ultimately, you're looking at all the data, as much data as you have. Software inherently is complex and unpredictable in some ways. There's always there's a reason why a lot of software development has moved away from waterfall to more agile methodologies is because there's so much inherent risk in the process. Um, so yeah, I think looking at those trade-offs, moment to moment, day to day, I think is really really important. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Um, Definitely. Let me look at my notes again. I think. Okay, yeah, perfect. I think with that, you mentioned, using LLMs and other tools. The topic I want to talk about a little bit with you was how, as someone working with technical people, developers, how do you help them change the tools that they're using? Like I said before, I've used, I know a bit about DevOps. I've done, I've helped teams integrate that. I think DevOps is a technology where, 99% of the cases is implementing some DevOps practices, maybe not best DevOps practices everywhere, but at least, going into like continuous deployments and trying to, implement some of those DevOps strategies is good for basically every project. Um, However, when I've asked my developers that I've worked with and, for myself to use like LLM coding tools, I get mixed results. Developers I work with gets mixed results. Some of them love them, some of them hate them with a passion. I'm more in the middle. I think sometimes it's really helpful.
Mhm.
Sometimes I just want to pull my hair out because it seems like it's hurting me more than it's helping me. So, um, how do you, as product manager for Microsoft, what does that environment look like over there? Of course, Microsoft has their own tools in
Mhm.
house. They have Copilot and things like that. Um, yeah, I'm just looking how. I'd love to hear some of your experiences on maybe your own uses of those tools.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think the first important thing to realize here is, um, you don't need to force use cases for this product, and I think that's a tricky thing with any emerging technology. It's like it's really cool, you wanna, like, apply it to all these different things, but, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail,
Yeah,
right? When you have an LLM, everything looks like a problem that can be solved with an LLM. But there are gonna be things that it's good for and things that it's not, and honestly, like, we're still figuring that out, and the LLMs are continuously developing at a really rapid pace,
yeah,
so that's also changing over time. So I think one of the most important things that I've experienced so far is the best use cases I've seen are sort of emergent, where it's not like we're trying to prescribe like we must use the LLM to write code or we must use the LLM to do this thing, but it's come more from people playing around with it, seeing how it fits into their process, seeing what works well and what doesn't, and reevaluating that because, as I said, that's changing over time. And
yeah.
I think like in this time of change, constant reflection and like retrying things is really important. Um, but really, like I think that, and then making sure that there's a space to share things that have worked well can be really important because for someone who may be a little bit more resistant to using AI or um, I mean, and I'm resistant in some ways as well. Like I really like to write, so I feel like that's the hardest thing for me is I'm
Yeah.
like I like my voice. I want to write this. um, but I think seeing examples of how other people are doing it can be a really good entry point, and especially other people who have found, really effective ways to use it. So one of the things that I love that we've done on my team is we've just had spaces for people to share their prompts and their processes that they're using. And that, like in writing, that's led me to a few different ways where I can have the LLM like not write everything for me, but where I can kind of think along with it and have it help it to speed me up a little bit. Um, as far as use cases where I found it really like right now, I'm finding it really useful. I think prototyping is an awesome space for
Yeah.
LLMs right now. Not in terms of like this is something that we're gonna turn into production code because I think having an LLM, like LLMs are not ready to write software from scratch right now that's going to scale and it's going to be, secure and performant and all of that.
I'm glad someone's
Readable.
saying it because
Yeah. But prototyping, that's something that takes time, and you don't need the code to be perfect. You just want
Yeah.
to get something up and running to demonstrate what you're thinking. Um, and when you get something out there, you inevitably realize things about it that you didn't realize you wouldn't have thought of before, like actually building something. You even when you have a prototype, you have something you can show to customers, and you can get that customer data early on, like how are people using this? Does it seem like this is going to be useful for them? Um, and I think the fact that you can, within minutes create a prototype with LLMs is really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And yeah, when you have the hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think there is LLMs seem like that, and I think it's being marketed in that in some ways. Uh, Maybe with that, just briefly, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but with hallucinations and LLMs, and maybe it taking information, presenting it very authoritatively, confident. Maybe you can share some of your thoughts around that, how it's maybe improving right now, and what can people do to um, use those LLMs more effectively in that way. I know for myself, I just don't trust anything I put into it, and I'm always second guessing it. And maybe it's faster in a lot of ways, especially with like prototyping, where it doesn't need to be perfect
Hmm.
as long as it can show me a result fast. Once again, I think software engineering, it's fine because we can write tests around things. It's really easy to validate things. It either works or it doesn't.
Yeah.
But then you have writing socially, getting information anecdotally. Maybe I shared this in the last podcast. I My wife and I were talking about doves, and I said, "Doves are just pigeons. They're just white pigeons." And she, of course, put it in the search engine, and the LLM response said, "No, doves are not pigeons." But she looks at every website underneath it, and it says, "Yeah, they're basically the same thing." So it's just
Uh,
like, there's so many little things that are harder to validate, even harder than the dove pigeon thing, right? Where it's just like you don't know, and then you get an LLM presenting this as very confident and giving you like a very authoritative answer when it's wrong. Or like maybe, science or whatever just doesn't have an answer yet, but it gives an answer. So um yeah, I guess your thoughts on maybe that and what we can do around the misinformation and hallucinations, things like that.
Totally. Yeah, it's a really important topic, and I mean, I think there's two ways to think about it. One is if we do want to use the LLMs in situations where hallucinations are going to be problematic, like the one you're describing, where you're asking it for a factual answer to something. Um, how do we create guardrails that are going to reduce the likelihood of that wherever possible? And accuracy is just it's a really interesting question around LLMs because um, we they are they're good at a lot of things, which is kind of like wild if you think about how they work. That doesn't necessarily follow um, if you just think about it intuitively. Um, and for example, we had some older analysis tech on Excel, which was using more deterministic, like classical AI models, and uh, LLMs did bring like a 20% quality increase on that, and uh, that was like GPT-3. I'm sure
Mm.
it's gotten even better since then. So um, it's interesting to think about like uh what what level of error are we okay with? Like we tolerate hallucinations in a person.
Yeah.
So like, how do we think about this thing? And I think part of it is also maybe, coming to understand LLMs. How much are we okay with? But there are certainly scenarios where like the guardrails are really important, and I think um, one there's lots of different ways that you can approach that. I think one thing is just preventing the LLM from performing certain actions that it has a high chance of hallucination on.
I
It's
get that, but it's so frustrating as a user, right? Of like, "Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, I can't give you that answer."
No, it is. Yeah, it's a tension. It is, because you want like after using ChatGPT, everyone's expecting a really they're expecting these chatbots to be able to like move mountains for
Yeah,
them. They're expecting the
yeah.
world. So yeah, there's certainly a tension where that you have to navigate with how do you constrain the LLM enough, but how do you also leave enough surface area for users to explore and be creative? Because that's sort of like what the magic of LLMs are. I think another way to think about it is also like how do we use LLMs and what uses play to their strengths,
Yep.
and that's why, like you mentioned, prototyping. I feel like creative sort of ideation is really a sweet spot for LLMs because, there's no right or wrong there, and hallucinations can even be sort of an asset in creativity. I I remember playing around with LLMs in the GPT-2 era, and I mean, their responses made very little sense
Yep.
at that time. It was like, who could have thought that they would have gotten to where they are? But at the same point, some things about those responses were kind of delightful from a creative standpoint. It's like, wow, like this is so random, so humorous. This is juxtaposing things I never would have thought to juxtapose. And so, as a I don't think LLMs should ever replace human creativity because they can. I mean, we like to be creative as humans. First of all, we don't want to lose that. Um, and if you use LLMs just to like point blank create things, they start to get very bland on average.
Yep.
But I do think like sort of being a partner in that creativity and helping us as humans like iterate on ideas, develop ideas is really a strong point for LLMs and a point where hallucinations are a little bit less problematic.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the insight there. I think my hope is as the technology progresses more, it becomes less and less of an issue. But it's something that I think about, and think about the political landscape, and things like that, and it's used as a tool in so many ways now. And when I guess with that, I really like your point of people who hallucinate also. Uh, and it's true. We tolerate that. Someone says something that's is factually wrong. You don't get mad at them most of the time for just not knowing something. They might be confident about it also. I think like I it it's it's I guess it's just interesting. I don't know the answer. I hope it gets better. I think that's one of the bigger things to fix about them.
Oh yeah.
Uh, um, yeah. Uh, I guess going on that, of course, you're a product manager for, once again, maybe one of the biggest pieces of software in the world, Microsoft Excel. Before having this podcast, I was thinking about what is Excel, right? And I think Excel might be one of the most important pieces of software ever, right? I think that's a piece of software that brought computers into the CEO's office. That's when I think businesses really started adopting computers as a whole. It's just such a powerful tool that finances, project management, so many different things it can do, and people do everything with it. I saw a video a couple of years ago of someone who made a flight simulator in Microsoft Excel. People like change the colors of the cells and make art with it. So as a product manager for Excel, how do you think about the features you're adding, the resources you're devoting to different things when you have such a wide and varied use cases and so many users?
I love that question. And I think that's like one of my favorite things about working on Excel has been that it is such a broadly used and loved tool. And I think the reason for that is it's sort of it's a unique thing where it's a very powerful data platform. It can work, like you said, kind of as a database. It can work for data analysis. It can do a lot of different things. It's very flexible in that way. But unlike other tools that perform those tasks, it's sort of uniquely usable because the grid is front and center. You're looking at your data the whole time. You can manipulate it sort of spatially. And, spatial things tend to be a little bit more intuitive to humans. So we have this powerful platform paired with this interface that is um, sort of intuitive in a different way than other data analysis tools. And I think honestly, that's one of the um, as we're thinking about prioritizing features for Excel, I think keeping that sort of platform mindset is really important for us. Like we do a lot of user research, and that's really important to know. Like how are people using our tools? What are the most pressing like use cases that we want to improve or that people need additional tools for? But at the same time, I think the real magic of it is that when we add a new feature, we sort of work it into this platform, and we're thinking about how do we make this flexible? How do we make it integrate with all the other Excel things so people can kind of run with it and do things with it that we wouldn't necessarily be able to anticipate ahead of time.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's also an interesting question to consider with LLMs because I think they're kind of like that too. They are people do new things with LLMs all the time. And one thing that I've sort of learned through putting AI in Excel as well is in the beginning we were thinking about it from a feature standpoint of like what are the like individual like uh, jobs to be done like and we focused on a few different skills basically. Um, and then, of course, people were expecting to be able to do those things in different ways than we imagined, and to do things that we also hadn't imagined. So, I've also like started to think of developing for AI more in the sense of a platform.
What do
In
you,
term,
what do you mean by that? Developing for AI and
yeah, thinking of it not as like a um, And there's like I'm not saying that we shouldn't be thinking about use cases in either mode. Like I think being grounded in the value that you're adding in the use cases is really like foundational and important to making a useful tool of any kind, including LLM based tools. But with a sort of boundless affordance like a chatbot, people want that tool to be they wanna be able to do all kinds of different things with that tool. They wanna be able to use it with different ways, different phrasings, different, uh, in our case, different types of data and different configurations. So, I've started to think more in terms of, like, how do we develop something, um, that is flexible?
right.
So, we're not constraining to the one, like, happy path that we think users are gonna be using, but we're allowing for lots of different options and configurations along the way so people can kind of create their own happy path through when they're using the product.
Do you also mean like AI agents using Excel when you say that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So of course, the user flows have used it, but
Yeah.
how if I want, data brought in from the web and I want to do these transformations on it and I want it laid out and a chart at the end, that's something that someone who doesn't use Excel a lot, that'd be really good for me to put into, Copilot, right? And say,
Mhm.
hey, I have this website. Can you pull it from, information from this table? And I want to see like it aggregate this um, and then let an AI agent, that AI agent Copilot go in and make that for me in Excel. So that's what you're thinking about now.
Yeah, those types of things. And I love how you described that because it's like you described a very multi-stage user journey, and I think a lot of a lot of people's expectations for AI kind of goes in that direction. Like they have a job to be done. It has many different steps and stages to it, which would be quite complex to figure out as a human if you haven't done those things in Excel before.
Yeah.
Um, and how do you get the AI um, to solve that for you? Which is quite a complex problem. I think really like in the AI space, we're still trying to figure out how do we create a tool that's flexible enough in order to be able to like hook into all those different places, like grabbing data, analyzing data, um, presenting data, and how do we do that in a way where we still keep the user in the loop and we let them sort of direct the way that it's being done so we get to the outcome that they want, but also we sort of abstract the complexity of all the different like tools and features it's using to get there.
Yeah. I think maybe along those lines, we have LLMs and they feel like, these big, especially these massive models, right, that just kind of do everything.
Hmm.
I feel like that trend is going to start going away where we start getting specialized
Mhm.
models. Maybe in my situation I described, we might have one model or one tool that's going to reach out to the website, specialize in searching the web and getting data from that, and then it's going to pass it off to the next agent who's really good at working with Excel, and things like that. Do you think
Mhm.
am I do you feel the same way with that's probably the trend that we're going to have to go instead of like these really complex big models, we're going to start seeing more specialized models that are going to start working together better.
Yeah. I'm a little bit undecided. I feel like I could see it going either way. I definitely am seeing more of a trend towards training in the industry, which is, like, pushing us in the direction of more specialized models. I think the problem of having models be able to talk to each other is a very hard problem, though.
Yeah.
And so, in order to really reach that world, we need to figure out context. I think context is always a challenge for LLMs. And, like, how do we give each model the context that it needs to solve that problem? And also, how do we make sure the context is passed on between different agents? Um, and then how do we sort of ensure sort of a continuity in tasks between these different agents and make sure that they're, working towards a sensible end instead of like spinning between each other endlessly. So um, I think that sort of model would work well because when you do have like pre-trained and specialized agents, you can control for things like hallucinations. You can make sure that they're going to do a good job at the tasks that they're made to do. Whereas if you just use a general purpose LLM, it's kind of a wild card.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, there's a lot of big challenges I think that still need to be solved there.
Got it. Do you think individual technology companies should be investing more in AI, in more in their own AI tools, or do you think I've seen articles I think recently saying a lot of companies are investing. Oh, I can't remember. I think I've seen it both ways, where companies that are spending a lot of money on third party tools aren't doing well
Mhm.
because those tools aren't doing quite what they need, and then also companies that are spending money on developing their own in-house AI tools never get to a spot where it's actually useful. So
Mhm.
I wonder, what are your thoughts on that? Should companies at this point, September 2025, be looking in-house to maybe specialized AI tools or seeing how they can, use third-party tools?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends. There's a wide variety of different, uh, different ways that AI can be valuable, and I'd say probably like having a solid idea of like what is the value that I'm hoping to get here is a really important baseline, um, especially as these tools are so they can do so many different things. What's the value that really you're trying to get out of it? And I think honestly, I think the best advice I can give in September 2025 is, just experiment. Like, AI has made it really cheap to try things out, um, and to, like we talked about earlier, kind of prototype without investing a whole lot of time and money in it. Um, so I would say, try things, see what works, but be willing to pivot if it's not working out, and whether that's external tools or internal tools.
Yeah. I think this kind of goes back to the theme maybe of this episode of when you have the hammer, everything looks like a nail. And
Yeah.
if you don't actually have a real use case, like it really depends so much on your use case, right? Like
Mhm.
maybe it makes sense to go third party, maybe it makes sense to go in house. But I think maybe you can agree with this. The advice is if you don't have a problem you're trying to solve, don't make an AI to solve an unknown problem,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Oh, yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, I think experimentation is good. Like, if you find that an LLM sort of emergently helps you solve a problem that you didn't know you needed, that's cool. But, yeah, I feel like it's really easy to force AI into places where it doesn't need to be and it's not helpful right now. So,
Yeah.
definitely the value. Always go back to the value.
Cool. I want to go back to AR and VR. You've worked on
Mhm.
that previously. Once again, I think this is another maybe much more niche than AI, where we're seeing it in specialized cases. But at the same time, I'm seeing AR glasses. They're showing up a lot more. Uh, what are your thoughts there? Do you think it's going to get to a place where everyone's going to have like glasses or a headset in their home? Do once again, think it's the same problem with AI where, it's this really cool tool. It's the hammer and you want everything to be a nail, but it turns out working on a Word document or Excel on your headset on like an AR or VR headset is just a worse experience right now than just doing it on a computer or a laptop.
Mhm.
So, um, where do you see the future of AR and VR?
Mm.
Do you think it's gonna get really, come over and, uh, you know, be used everywhere?
Yeah, I love that we're talking about this. I feel we had the AR/VR moment kind of before LLMs took over, and so a lot of it's been kind of where the industry has been putting its focus. But yeah, I think the similarities with LLMs are very apt. It's another one of those technologies that is very like there's lots of ways that it could be used, and how do we find the value? Like what are the problems this can really help us solve? Um, for me, when I was working with AR, I think one of the coolest things about it was the usability, and I think it's it's interesting because we've been trained so much to use our phones and our computers, and they're sort of like unnatural interaction patterns that we've learned
Yep.
in order to be able to use these interfaces. And AR VR allows for interaction patterns that might be a little bit more natural because we as humans are used to just kind of moving around a space and interacting in a space. Um, my favorite illustration of this is actually um, when I was in college working on a HoloLens project. I uh, I was at home for some reason. I had the HoloLens with me, and I had my dad try it out. And he is very like he will not have a cell phone.
Mm,
He's very like low tech, and so when I gave this to him, I was like, I don't really expect him to be able to like figure out how to use my software. There's a lot going on here, and he just like he figured it out faster than most other people who I've seen. He was just like talking to it, moving things around, totally natural for him.
yeah.
And I think, honestly, maybe because he's like less used to the cell phone interfaces that we're all used to, he was able to sort of, uh, just more naturally like find those affordances in space and use them. So that was really cool to see. Um, and I like that's what excites me about AR really is how do we create this more natural mode of interaction. I think it's struggled to sort of find its place between the consumer and enterprise areas.
Yep.
Like there were some very strong, clear enterprise scenarios that, for example, Microsoft pursued. Um, but that was sort of very, very specialized, a little bit niche. I don't think it's really found its stride in the consumer space yet.
If there was one company to do it, I thought it would be Apple.
So did I.
But yeah, even for them, for me, like as a developer, it feels like the software tools aren't there yet. You need the apps on the product. You need
Mhm.
a easy developer experience to make those apps. And when I think about it, how do maybe I'm sure there's, SDKs and things to, on hand movements and things like that, but it's so unintuitive, I think, for the developer a lot of the times that it's just like, how do you make useful and cool things in it without it being just so difficult and hard? And it's like, how do you get developers to adopt it? Because you need the developers to adopt it first before you get consumers to adopt it.
Mhm.
For me, that feels like one of the places where it's still not there yet.
That's a great point. Yeah, it was. I mean, the last time I developed for AR was like 2019, or maybe 2021. But yeah, it was very clunky then, and I'm sure it's still
Yeah.
very clunky. I've heard developing for the Apple headset can be difficult. Um, yeah, and anything in 3D
Yes.
becomes inherently it's like you're adding a whole
Yeah, I've
nother
done some game
layer
design
of
also, and
complexity.
it's just like
Yeah.
the 2D relatively easy, but once you get into 3D, have to, you know, worrying about like gimbal lock and learning quaternions,
Mhm.
that's probably going over a lot of people on this podcast, but it's just like the 3D creates such a headache in so many ways. And yeah, you have to be really specialized. You have to, And once again, I think the developer experience is worse. It's like
Mhm.
being on a computer. It's really easy to test a product. It's
Mhm.
really easy to run it. But like going from coding to putting on the headset, loading the app again. I haven't really done it, but I just can't imagine it's a fun experience a lot of time for the developer.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And it's this would be a long pull, but I feel like in some ways, like AR VR can be part of the solution to the problem as well. Developing for 3D on a computer is hard because it is a 2D sort of interface. Um, Developing for 3D in a 3D space makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, in terms of like, placement of things, you're always going to have sort of the code interface where you have to be thinking about the math. But um, I think exploring like how do we also bring development tools into 3D space is
Yeah.
an important part of that.
What are some other emerging technologies? What are you excited about in technology space right now? We've talked so much about LLMs, of course. We talked a little
Mhm.
bit about AR, VR, but surely there's other things out there. So, um, anything else that you're excited about that's going on?
Yeah. There's my head's been in LLMs so long. This is a great question. It's nice to remember that there's other stuff going on. Um, I I think sort of tying together LLMs and AR VR, and this is getting very futuristic and like experimental. Like there's a lot to be figured out about how this technology would work. But brain computer interfaces
Oh yeah,
are I think are really interesting to think about right now, especially now that we do have LLMs, which are these super powerful like language machines. Um, and also like AR VR, where we're starting to bring our technology more into space. I start to think about things like, will we get to the point where we can sort of like interact with our environments just with our mind,
yeah.
which is again
A Black
lots of
Mirror episode, I'm pretty sure.
yeah, we'd like it to go within the better direction than the Black Mirror episode, and I think there's a lot of research and a lot of guardrails and a lot of design that needs to go into figuring out like how would we do that in a safe and helpful way. But
Yeah,
um, I think that it's exciting to think about in terms of like creativity. I love computational creativity, that space. What are um, different ways that we can create things. I feel like as an artist, the act of getting something from your brain onto the page or whatever you're making is always there's always such a like difficult translation process, and the thought of being able to more directly create something and like see it come out of your mind is really exciting to me. Um, and also, I think in accessibility, there's some exciting leaps forward that could be made there. Like for those who, are not able to interact with their environment physically, how could they sort of bypass that?
yeah. I love that. I used to work for when I was doing IT. My boss was nearly blind, and we talked a lot about self-driving cars, another emerging technology. We'll see if it ever
Hmm.
gets there. That that would be a game changer for him. Where
Hmm.
he definitely can't drive, but once he gets someplace, he has enough vision and he can mostly navigate his way places. But he's so limited, on what he can do. But if self-driving cars are available, it would enable him. And I think there's so many. I love that you brought that up. There's so many ways that technology can enable uh, people with disabilities, help with accessibility. Um, of course, like Elon Musk's brain chip. You're talking about the brain technology interface. One of the first recipients of it, was I think completely paralyzed, and it was a way for him to interact with the world that even if it wasn't perfect, it was still so much for him. And I think I'm so glad you brought that up. There's so much doom and gloom in society, especially in technology right now. Talk Black Mirror episodes, whatever, super AIs and taking over the world, Skynets, things like that. But I think technology does, it can be so useful for those that need help in that way. And I think, uh, yeah, I'm definitely excited to see how technology can go that way. Maybe I should have asked this question first, but what scares you? What are you not excited about? What?
Ooh, good good question. Okay, I'll preface this by sort of responding to what you said. Um I think the stories we tell about technology can be really important. Now that we're talking about sci-fi, like they say art imitates reality, and I think we, as a society, like our sort of anxiety about technology is reflected in the stories that we tell. And we see a lot of apocalyptic sort
Yeah,
of dystopian stories about technology. Um, and I think it is really important that we also tell those stories of like what are the things that technology can do for us that brings us hope? What are the directions that we would like to see technology going in? Um, and I think having that kind of direction of imagination out there inspires like subconsciously what we're building.
yeah,
So um, yeah, I love that you brought that up. I think those hopeful stories are really important. As far as what scares me, there's a lot. I mean, it's easy to say this. I feel like new technologies always like create fears about ways of life changing and things being lost. And of course, we experience that in our time as we have in previous times throughout history. Um, I think a lot of the ways that we think about technology right now are very, um, we have a tendency to think of um, like scientific and technical knowledge kind of as truth, and I think that's what informs a lot of what we build today. Um, Whereas there are other ways of knowing, like through the humanities, literature, storytelling, that I think are just as valuable and important for the human
yeah, for
experience.
sure.
And I think what scares me the most is if we sort of forget those things as we build technology, and if we don't, bring those things, those other ways of knowing and being into the technological age, um, into the LLM age. So, um, for me, I think um, just like interdisciplinary conversation about all these things is really important, and making sure that there's not just like one predominant viewpoint that's driving how these technologies are developing.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's so important also, and it's. I think that scares me also. Right now you look at art generated by an AI tool. You look at writing generated by an AI tool, and it's easy for I think a lot of people to tell which one is done by a real human artist. It has emotion to it. You talked earlier about not letting to use AI for your writing because it loses your voice. I feel the same way. I almost always refuse to use AI tools when I write because it loses my voice, and I do not like that. Um, but it worries me. Like I've seen it progressing. Will it get to a time where it's impossible for most people to distinguish? And does that mean humans will lose that outlet? Will lose that on and I think you're right. Like it's like for most of humanity's purpose, it's expressing ourselves to the universe in that way. And
Hmm.
it's scary when a technology now can kind of do something. It's getting close to there, and yeah. Well, hopefully, I'm an optimistic. I'm an optimist around technology, and well, hopefully, we get to the Star Trek, future where people are free to express themselves and do it, and they don't have to worry about, you know, the AI can do their jobs for them, and they can do what they want to do instead. So, um, I think we're getting after the end. Yep. Thanks, Kobe. Anything else that you want to plug? Anything else that you want to talk about? What you're up to? Uh, what you want to share with the listeners of the podcast?
Yeah, we we've covered a lot here. I think just like tying it back all together, I I like where we ended with kind of talking about the these different directions technology can go, how it's important to imagine the futures that we want to see and to put those images out there. I think it's also really important as developers, as we're building technology, as we're in the space where things are rapidly evolving almost faster than we can keep track of it. um, I think it's really important for us to stay grounded in the value of what we're building, and like um, how are we going to make people's lives better with these things. And I know in development, like, you get so in the weeds,
Yep.
and there's so much pressure right now, I think, to use these technologies and to build things. Um, but I would say it's more important than ever to be thinking about users, like, what are their needs? What are the things that we can make better in their lives so that they can do the things that they want? I think
Yeah.
um, that's the promise of AI that excites me, is how do we give people more time to do things like create, or be empowered to create, more than they could before. So I think it's it's a really exciting time because there are a lot of different directions that we can go, and I think as developers, if we really stay grounded in that future that we want to see, then we can make it happen.
Awesome. Thank you, Olivia. It was an honor to have you on the Tech Talks podcast. Thanks again.
Thanks for watching this In Time Tech podcast. If you'd like to learn more about what we can offer you, please visit our website, intimetech.com, where you'll be able to see the different capabilities and technologies we could provide you in your business. Also, don't forget to subscribe and follow us to get more amazing content like this. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.